Have you ever completely ran out of condoms and just reused an old one? Just kind of rinsed it out in your bathroom sink. Just kind of let it hang out and dry for a little bit and then just put it back on. No, you haven't? Well, of course not. That's absolutely disgusting. But it seems like that's what a lot of these companies are doing nowadays. They're reusing, they're repainting, but there's no new resculpting going on. They're regurgitating the same absolute nonsense into our mouths. And as consumers, for the most part, we've just been gobbling it up. But today I wanted to kind of study the difference between really good reuse of body molds or large portions of an old figure, and then examples of really bad reuse or really lazy reuse, where it's apparent that it's an absolute cash grab and the company is completely sticking it to the consumer. I am only going to give you guys some modern examples and just a few. I don't want to make this video way too long. Nobody wants to hear me blab on for more than a few minutes, let's be brutally honest. So let's just jump straight into this. The perfect first example that I wanted to mention was something that I don't think a lot of people think of when they think of, Hasbro and Marvel Legends. But we have the most modern rendition of the Marvel Legends Hulk body mold, which has been reused more than your mom at the local bar. It was originally used for that 80-year anniversary Hulk that came in a 2-pack with Wolverine. I believe all of the figures or both of the figures were based on the first appearance of Wolverine in the comic books. It was the first time that we were introduced to this particular body mold, and it came with some alternate hands as well as some soft plastic that was draped over his shoulders, which was supposed to be his ripped clothing coming off. It had great points of articulation, great ankle pivoting, and the reverse butterfly joints gave you an opportunity to really get crazy with some really dynamic poses. Almost as soon as we received this 2-pack, there was a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive retro carded Hulk that was announced, basically the exact same figure with the new head sculpt, and then it included a new accessory, which was the crush pipe, which they continued to repackage with other Hulks. I personally wasn't a huge fan of that head sculpt, but it was the first time that we got to see this particular version or this body mold in a retro carded bubble, which was really nice, especially if you wanted to grab an extra one, maybe open one and then keep one to display or hang on your wall. One of the only downsides to trying to pick up this particular figure was that if you weren't in San Diego, you were going to have to pay a premium. I believe this was going for about $100 or a little bit over $100 through third-party retailers. The third use or iteration of this particular body mold came to us in the form of the Marvel Legends retro carded gray Hulk, which, as I mentioned, had the same articulation, the same body, just gray paint instead of the green. And then on top of that, they included the crush pipe as well, and this obviously had a different head sculpt from the first two that we had received. And as I mentioned, this was a brand new figure technically, or a brand new version of Hulk, whereas in the previous two just had different shades of green. But again, it came in that retro carded packaging, and let's be brutally honest, as collectors, that is one of our Achilles heels. We definitely love ourselves some retro carded goodness. So this was definitely a figure that if you picked up an extra one of, you were definitely going to display him mint on card as well as opened in your display. Unfortunately, this was a fan channel exclusive and somewhat difficult to find. If you were able to pick them up at Best Buy, you were getting an absolute bargain at about $35. But if you were an unlucky bastard like myself, you were stuck paying a bit of a premium, picking up from places like GameStop at around $50. Right when you thought Hasbro had thought of every single use for this particular body mold, they threw an absolute curveball to all of those that are big giant Hulk fans by releasing the Target exclusive Marvel Legends Red Hulk. Same thing, very exclusive, very difficult to find, whether you were looking to find him online, in store, or even through third-party retailers. But this was officially the first time that they had used this body mold for another character not named Bruce Banner. And even though the previous three figures were just different versions of Hulk himself or Bruce Banner, it still didn't feel like the market was fatigued by those particular figures. I still felt like there was a really big, strong support from the fan base to continue using the body mold because it was really well engineered. It gave you the opportunity to get Hulk Hulk in some really amazing poses. So to be brutally honest, I think there was very little criticism when it came down to Hasbro continuing with this body mold. We eventually got the Maestro Hulk, which was another alternate version of the character, and even though that specific character wasn't my favorite, I think that the head sculpt for this particular figure was by far my favorite. There wasn't like a huge fan base for this particular figure, and I don't think anybody was really clamoring for it, but it was just another great reuse of a fantastic body mold. And like I mentioned, they gave us a really good head sculpt, which I really thoroughly enjoyed. Again, not my favorite version, but just the head sculpt alone was worth the pickup in my personal opinion. We also received the 20th anniversary figure, which was again another version of Hulk, slightly different color tone, brand new head sculpt, 2 alternate hands, and then a little background that was kind of very reminiscent to what people were getting back in the Toy Biz days. And the packaging itself was meant to mirror those old school figures. I didn't collect those personally back then, but it was a good nostalgia tug for those people that have been collecting for that period of time. It was a slightly increased price point. This was being sold anywhere from $40 to $45, so it was definitely like the new deluxe price tag. But in my personal opinion, another great figure, another great reuse of that particular body mold. But enough of that big giant green hunk of plastic. There are plenty of other examples of really good repaints that aren't necessarily just manufactured from Hasbro. You did have, for example, the Platinum Edition 1966 Batman figures that McFarlane released not too long ago. The blueprint was actually pretty simplistic. They had the normal figure, which was widely available everywhere through every normal retailer you can think of. However, the Platinum Edition was supposed to be like a limited edition variant of that particular figure. It usually just had a small little difference, maybe like an extra little mask, or some of them were maskless. It just depended. The only real difference between that figure, the Platinum Edition, and the original release was just a simple swap of the head sculpt. And it wasn't like they had to go out of their way to create a brand new head sculpt. I mean, obviously they did have to originally, but these were head sculpts that they were going to use later down the road with other versions of the characters. It was a very simplistic detail, but it was very smart. It was very subtly done. And again, didn't feel like the customer was taking advantage of, because if you were able to find one of these Platinum Editions, there was an added value because they were much more rare than like the wider release. That isn't the only time that we've seen McFarlane do really good reuses of body molds or repaints. We actually saw him release a Red Hood that basically had 2 versions of the same exact figure. One of them had the actual Red Hood mask, while the other was unmasked. One of them was supposed to be limited, I believe, to Walmart, and then the other one had a wider release. But at least McFarlane gave you options in terms of what figure you wanted, and it allowed McFarlane to continue using the body mold and really squeeze every single drop that he possibly could out of it. Like I said, these are just a few examples of some really good reuses. As I mentioned, this video could be easily much longer, but let's try to shorten this up, and I'll give you guys my personal opinion of really bad repaints or figures that, to be brutally honest, probably don't even need to exist. The most prime example of this has to be the Artist Proof line from McFarlane, which is basically a figure that he's already released. However, the figure literally has no paint applied to it. Originally, these Artist Proof Platinum figures were supposed to be variations of the originals, and they were supposed to be a little bit more difficult to find. I don't know exactly what the ratio was for them, but I'm assuming that it was like maybe 1 for every 10 to 20 figures. So as I mentioned, maybe like one per store type of situation. So they were a little bit more exclusive, but the idea that McFarlane actually greenlit these figures is baffling to me. You essentially only have 2 options. You can either take this whole figure apart and repaint it yourself, or just leave it in packaging as kind of like a really cool, hard to find figure. Maybe hang it on your wall somewhere, but I doubt that there are people actually opening these big giant hunks of gray plastic and just displaying them that way. At times it does feel like McFarlane is a little bit out of touch with the collector community, because I don't really feel that there is a ton of support for this style of figure. I'll give you guys one last example, and perhaps this is probably the most painful one to think about, but what about these re-released deluxe figures that at one point were Build-A-Figures from Hasbro, maybe a couple of years before the deluxe release? You actually had to go out of your way, buy an entire wave, and actually connect these figures. Not to mention that sometimes there might be a figure here and there from certain particular waves that are very difficult to find at retail. So maybe you had to pay up a little bit through eBay, or maybe like a Facebook marketplace purchase, and maybe you bought an entire wave that you weren't really that interested in. Maybe you only wanted a couple of figures from that particular wave. You went through all of that trouble, blood, sweat, and tears, as some people like to say, all of that only to have Hasbro re-release it a couple of years later for that deluxe price, like $30 to $35, which seems to be the price point nowadays. But what a way for Hasbro to kind of stab their customers in the back. And in some cases, they're just clear-cut re-releases, or there's like a different, slightly different color tone or a slightly different wash on the figure. There's not even extra accessories, and even when there are, they're completely unnecessary accessories. And I completely get the mindset of re-releasing some of these as deluxe figures for those people that maybe just weren't collecting Marvel Legends at that time, but it also doesn't make sense if you're going to continue this practice. I honestly feel like you should just go away from the Build-A-Figure style of selling your figures or connecting them. It would probably be a better option to just sell everything as a deluxe figure if it deserves deluxe packaging and that deluxe price tag. And like I mentioned, it will definitely sting a little bit more if just a few years ago you had to jump through a bunch of loopholes just to connect and build the figure, only to have them re-release it eventually. So there you go. As I mentioned, I just wanted to make a quick little video giving you guys my personal perspective, my point of view when it comes down to these re-releases or repaints, regardless of what manufacturers these came from. I feel like there are really good ways to kind of hide the fact that you're trying to reuse the body mold while still giving the customer something that they desperately need in their collection. So I think there's a fine line there. As the OM, I think you definitely have to tread lightly, because otherwise it may seem like you're just trying to take advantage of the customer, and it definitely leaves a very bitter taste in the mouth of all collectors. So that's all, just a bunch of rambling to say a couple of sentences, but there you have it. Let me know in the comment section your thoughts. I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say. Hit the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you.